Hello everyone, Lunar Warfare, and welcome to the Week 3 episode for the Delirium and 3.10 Challenge League. For viewers that prefer an audio-only version of the Chaos Report, you'll be able to find it over on my Patreon for free, as per usual. You'll be able to find a link to the voice-only versions in the descriptions down below. Quick reminder, you can also find the timestamps to each section in the pinned comment down below. Please stop asking for them. Do keep in mind that this entire video is based on educated guesses or predictions, and as such, they might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that might seem obvious to many, and for that I apologize. It's hard to cover everything after all. If I do miss something you think is important, leave it in the comments down below. And what that means, of course, is invest at your own risk. And with the usual disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right in. The first segment breaks down currencies and commodities, such as the Influence, Exalted Orbs, and Fragments, including the new Simulacrum splinters. I'll be giving a quick overview of the most important currencies during this past week, and predictions on how they'll likely continue to progress in this following one. First up, as always, are the OG Exalted Orbs. They have followed our predictions fairly closely and risen up to a 146 Chaos price point so far. They're seemingly dropping again, however, which is quite typical for Exalted Orbs at this point in the league. You can usually always find a rise with a dip in prices at around the 30-day mark of every league. That's exactly where we are right now. Following the usual Exalted Orb pattern, they will likely bottom out at a minimum of around 110 Chaos at most, only to rise back up to about 140 to 170 Chaos in the following 2 weeks after the dip. You should expect the aforementioned price changes for the following week or two, as this league seems to follow the usual price graphs fairly accurately. Additionally, there do not seem to be any outside influences preventing Exalted Orbs from doing so, such as increased crafting prices, league mechanics that don't drop anything, or things of that nature. It seems unlikely, however, that Exalted Orbs will reach the 200 Chaos mark this league. There's currently no indicator for that to be economically viable throughout the entire league. As for the Influence Exalted and Awaken Orbs, let's take a look at them. I mentioned last week a lot of times that the Influence Exalted Orb prices are bound to the OG Exalted Orb, and we see a great example of this happening here. After the OG Exalt rose drastically around the middle of last week, all the Influence Orbs also rose as a result. This is because these orbs are often priced in Exalt. As a result, if the Exalt to Chaos ratio changes, so does the Influence Orb to Chaos ratio. The Hunter's Exalted Orb is currently sitting at around 327 Chaos as a result. It is slowly adjusting back to its old pre-rise value, as they usually do. Expect the Hunter Orb to get back down to around 310 to 330 Chaos in this following week, unless Exalted Orbs rise again. The Awaken Orb is currently sitting at around 325 Chaos and shares its number 2 spot with the Hunter, as well as the Warlord's Orb, the latter losing quite a lot of value since last week. This one has seen an equally large rise as a result of the OG's Exalt's movements, but have also been hit with a large increase of supply due to players finally reaching their Awakening level 8, and thusly increasing their drop rate for these orbs. Expect the orbs to stick around the 250 to 300 Chaos mark after this following week, barring any Exalt price rises or sudden popularity due to content creators. The Warlord's Exalted Orb was the most expensive orb for the first few weeks, but has since then seen a large decrease in prices. Despite it also seeing a large surge due to the OG Exalt price rising, it has overall mostly lost value, and is now finding itself at the number 2 spot, together with the 2 previously mentioned orbs. It is currently sitting at around 315 Chaos, but is projected to continue falling towards around 300 Chaos. Last league, this orb saw a gigantic amount of fluctuations, anywhere between 400 Chaos and as low as 240 Chaos. As such, it is very difficult to predict anything based on previous league's graphs, however. With the current apparent popularity of Cyclone, it is likely that it will stay rather popular as well. The Crusader Orbs are, surprisingly, the new kings of the Exalted Orbs. They're currently sitting at 340 Chaos, and have shown a slower descent than the other orbs after their rapid rise from the Exalt jump. It is likely that the new rise in popularity is due to mana stackers and ES-based characters, and has reinvigorated the demand for this orb. Especially after the nerf for the Herald Abuse build, many players figured it might be worthwhile to, start a new character. As ES-based characters are currently some of the strongest possible, especially with ES gain on block, which is also a Crusader affix, it is likely that those factors contributed to the popularity of this orb. Expect it to stick around this number 2 spot for at least as long as the ES-based builds remain popular for players to create in the current league, which I would assume would be at least a few weeks. They're projected to slightly fall still, however, but I would imagine they will balance out before they hit the 300 Chaos mark. And lastly, as always, the Redeemer's Exalted Orb. Still, the ugly stepchild of the Influence Orbs, it has remained as its last place position, currently denoted at a 212 chaos price point with a projected fall towards potentially a sub 200 chaos mark in the following week. Not much to say about this one, it's simply not the best option compared to all the other influences for probably about 99% of crafts. As a result, it's a very niche item to buy, but the supply stays the same as all the other Influence Orbs, so that's how you get those prices. As per usual, with the entire Exalted Orb section, it's very hard to make 100% accurate predictions. As such, if you intend on buying them, make sure to keep an eye on this extremely volatile market space and check them regularly to find the best time to buy and sell them. Alteration Orbs have shot up to an extreme price point over the past 2 days. They're currently sitting at an all-time high price of 3.5 to 1 chaos, but it's not quite clear why this is the case. It could be because people were rapidly dumping them once they reached the previous high mark, drastically increasing supply at that time. However, there might also be a myriad of other explanations, such as a content creator making a popular build that relies on a few specifically crafted affixes or similar things. As a result, I would warn about buying alterations right now, as it is not likely that they'll stay at this high price for an extended period. Another round of alteration stockpile dumping could be incoming. Similarly to last week's advice, of course, while alteration orbs are at this expensive, it is worthwhile to pick up talismans and breach rings specifically, to vendor them for extra profit. An inventory full of those jewelry items can easily net upwards of 30 alteration orbs, which is equivalent to about 5 to 6 chaos per map. Would be nice if it was 30 Exalted Orbs though, I'll tell you that much. Last but not least, the Ancient Orb. When I mentioned last week that we might remove these from the list, an interesting development has happened in the past few days. They have seen a slight increase in prices over the past 24 hours, which is quite substantial considering how large the supply of cheap Ancient Orbs actually is. If this price rise continues, then it is fairly likely that somebody has figured out a way to make a profit with them by chancing and selling specific unique items. I, myself, have no idea what might be the use for all these Ancient Orbs that are being bought. It could be that somebody is trying to manipulate the market to get them to a certain price, to trigger a mass panic buy from potential investors, to then dump their stock, essentially forcing a bigger fool scenario. As a result, be careful with the Ancient Orbs for now. Consider holding on to them if you're scared of losing out, but feel free to sell them for an increased price for much needed value. I'm not going to predict the future prices, but there's a good chance they might increase, as 2 out of 3 possible scenarios predict a rise in my books. For the commodities section, we'll be covering the different fragment pieces, as well as the Synthesis and Guardian maps, and lastly, we'll also be looking at the Simulacrum and its splinters. I'll quickly update you on the prices for the different maps and fragments for this week, and give my predictions for the upcoming one as always. Shaper fragments range from 25 to 36C, meaning that one Shaper's net will net you about 120 chaos at average. They have seen a drastic drop since last week, due to the fix of the Herald build introduced in one of the recent hot fixes. As a result of that fix, the Solstice Vigil, which was the main drop people farmed for on this boss, lost a tremendous amount of value, making the fight way less appealing to boss farmers and casual players alike. Currently, running Shaper is a net profit, as the Uber fragments pretty much make up the cost of the run themselves already. As such, if you're just getting there, feel free to try your luck on some of his drops, it doesn't cost anything. On the other hand, there's more worthwhile opportunities out there, as you'll see later in the video. The Uber fragments provided by Shaper, as mentioned, have seen a large increase in prices, as people have stopped running tons of Shaper sets. They're currently at around 120 to 125 chaos each, while the ones provided by Elder are sitting at around 40 to 45 chaos. That means one Uber set will net you around 330 chaos at average. This is more of a return to form compared to the previous league, and is an expected price range for these fragments to stick around for the majority of the league. There are still some very worthwhile uniques available from this boss fight, and is honestly just really fun to do as well. I would highly recommend at least doing a few of these every league, just for the fun it involves, and also the chance to get a great head start with your currency, as an unidentified Watcher's Eye will net you around 5 Exalted Orbs at the current market, and is always nice to have. The Elder fragments themselves are sitting at around 30 to 46 chaos each, meaning that one set will net you around 140 to 180 chaos. This marks the first time that Elder fragments are more expensive than the Shaper ones, as a result of not only people running less Shaper, but also a ton of Shaper fragments dropping from the Simulacrum encounter itself. As a result, there's less demand and more supply for the fragments of Shaper, rather than the ones for Elder. Additionally, as previously mentioned, unidentified Watcher's Eyes Even the 2 mod variety ones can be many exalts to the right gambler. For most players, I'll probably advise to sell their pieces, however, as the Uberlord fragments will barely cover a quarter of your costs per one, and Elder doesn't really feature a ton of potential drops to make it worth your while outside of the Watcher's Eye. The Synthesis unique maps are all sitting at around 59 to 83 chaos right now, with the exception being the Cortex, which has seen a large rise in prices as predicted and is now sitting at around 4.4x or about 580 chaos. It seems to be slowing down its rise and it's slightly above the last league prices. As a result, it is fairly likely that they'll either stabilize at this price point or drop down to about 500 chaos in the next following week. It is rather unlikely that they might rise again. I would still recommend most players to sell their Synthesis maps unless they have the money to spare, as the barrier to entry is fairly high at the current moment. The jackpot hits are pretty great, but only if you can actually manage to get them in the first place. As a result, consider selling them unless you can stomach a 100 to 600 chaos loss, depending on the map you decide to run, of course. Lastly, our new addition, the Simulacrum and its splinters. I'll be covering the Simulacrum in depth in a discussion segment for this week, of course. Definitely look forward to my spreadsheet if you're into numbers, because I am. The Simulacrum splinters are currently going for roughly 3 to 1 chaos ratio. As a result, a full Simulacrum is worth around 100 chaos in pure splinter value. Since last week, this full Simulacrum has moved closer to this value, and is currently worth about 95 chaos. They are very likely to increase in prices fairly soon, as more and more players reach the level of power to properly access the full encounter, as well as more people realize just how incredibly valuable they are to run, rather than to sell to others. I would absolutely recommend running them, but I'll cover this in its own segment later on in the video, of course. Now with those currencies and commodities covered, let's move on to our unique item watch list. I've decided to keep the list fairly short for the first 3 or 4 weeks, as the meta is usually rapidly developing, and fixating on too many fluctuating at once will not lead to any interesting results. To not waste any more time than I've already done, let's just take a look at the watch list. The first item on our watch list, of course, is going to be the Voices unique cluster jewel. Since last week, a lot has happened to this jewel in general, as the Herald Abuse build, which was the main reason for its insane popularity, was nerfed, which led many players to panic sell their voices. However, some players realized that this was pretty stupid, as the jewels themselves are still the strongest possible option for many builds out there. As such, they've been on a rise for a few days again, and are projected to hit similar prices to the previous heights with the Herald builds. They are also extremely rare, and can only drop from the Simulacrum encounter, which has also seen an increase in its entry cost. As such, the supply is going to be heavily limited, and the prices will be heavily based on a function of the Simulacrum's entry price, multiplied by the usefulness of the jewel and the rarity of it. As a result, they have risen to pretty high prices again. The 7 passive version has fallen, but it's now back up to selling for 5.5 exalts. The 5 passive version is selling for 19 exalts, which is actually 1 exalt higher than last week. And here we get to the juicy part. The 3 passive version is currently going for around 100 Exalted Orbs, which is more than twice as expensive as last week. And the 1 passive version has also more than doubled its price since the Herald build's craze, and is now sitting at 250 Exalted Orbs, or a little close to about 2 mirrors, in case you've never bought a mirror before. As you can see, the panic selling of overzealous Reddit users has heavily backfired on them. Many people that picked up a bunch of these during this time of rapid selling are laughing straight to the bank with it. What this tells us is one thing: don't overreact to nerfs that aren't actually written in any patch notes yet. After about 40 runs of the Simulacrum, I have yet to see a single one of these jewels. As such, don't be expecting them as a result in your Simulacrum runs, unless you're running a really large number of them. And even then, it's fairly likely you get the 7 passive one. Sources have told me that the 1 passive version only has about a 0.5% chance to drop. I'm not entirely sure how accurate that is, of course, but based on the supply count and the prices, I wouldn't be surprised if that was actually the case. Next up, the Solstice Vigil. Oof. So this one got blown up, basically. I mentioned the winner of the Herald nerf just now, but of course there also has to be a loser. This one is it. It is currently sitting at a 1.7 exalt price point, or about 225 chaos, comparatively to its 28 Exalted Orb price seen last week. As a result of the hotfix, the Herald buff effect no longer affects the Solstice Vigil's buff, which results in this item being effectively useless for the purposes of the Herald Abuse build. It is still extremely useful for any Headhunter builds, or a ton of different builds in general, that rely on the increased buff effects this item provides, but is in way too high of a supply at the moment to really give it a spotlight here. It is likely going to stay here for a while, unless another use is found for them. Similarly, Shaper Fragments are at an all-time low, which means acquiring these is also as easy as never before. As a result, if they don't change till next week, we'll simply be replacing it during our watchlist rework anyway. I'll be adding more items to this list over the next couple of episodes, but for now, those two will still be our only items. The voices are likely going to be a staple for Path of Exile going forward, similar to the Headhunter and the Savior Chase items, if they do get added to the core game. We'll keep an eye on those for the remainder of the league for sure, and we'll see how the price graph develops. Now, moving on to our third segment for this video, the meta-analysis. A lot has changed since last week, as the Herald build has only started becoming a large thing during the days of me writing the last episode. This has now become a very obvious thing, as firstly, the ladder has progressed to the 96 to 100 range, and secondly, Guardians are far and away the highest played ascendancy. Guardians and Elementalists were the two ascendancies people used for the Herald abuse. They've both seen a surge in popularity, but the Guardian way outshined every other ascendancy with all the extra aura and buff effect granted by the Herald cluster jewels. The build was denounced dead immediately after the announcement of the nerfs by a large portion of the people, but as you can clearly see, it's more than fine. The build is still the most powerful build we've probably ever seen in Path of Exile, even after the nerfs. Many Guardians managed to get to 96 in just those few days where the Herald abuse build became public knowledge and following. Other ascendancies have seen a large drop in popularity as a result. Most have lost about 1% play rate, but the Saboteur is now at 4% from last week's 7. This is likely to step up the ladder, as most minor builds are usually league starters, which are dropped at the latest at level 95. The only other ascendancy that gained a percentage is the Assassin. It's one of the most versatile ascendancies out there, and was at number 2 spot last week as well, so it's not surprising to see this result. We'll likely continue to see the meta shift towards ascendancies that make use of a lot of mana, ES, and buff effect, as players will gravitate towards the ridiculously strong build options provided by the Herald clusters. In overall, abilities used, we see no real changes compared to last week. Cyclone still rules the court by a large margin, as it's simply the best ability in the game. It is the best ability to use if you're a melee, a caster, a trigger player, or really just about anything, so why would you use anything else, right? Cyclone will never get nerfed and will always stay popular, so let's just move on so I can get out of here. As for the Atlas analysis, nothing has really changed since last week actually. Please refer back to the week 1 and plus 2 episode if you're looking for a map and strategy recommendations for the Atlas specifically. Always keep in mind, the base option of boss hunting the Conquerors is always worth a pretty penny. So don't be too afraid to just stick with that if you're a bit of a newer player. You're not going to be completely left behind just doing that. You'll be completely fine. Now, with the meta and Atlas analysis finished, let's jump right into the strategy discussion for this week. I'm excited. I'll be covering my findings for the Simulacrum, such as its general profitability. I'll also be giving my opinions on it, and will try to give you a rough estimate of how valuable it is to currently run for any particular player. I apologize if the data provided here doesn't 100% represent your own experiences. I can only provide the raw data that I have, so it might differ from your own. Also, try taking a shot every time I say Simulacrum. I dare you. First off, what exactly is the Simulacrum even? The Simulacrum is the in-game encounter for the Delirium Challenge League. In order to access it, you require the actual item called Simulacrum, which is created out of 300 Simulacrum splinters, and you need to place this item in an empty map device. It functions similarly to Legion emblems and Breachstones of old. This will open a portal to one of 5 different layouts to fight in. There are a total of 20 waves of enemies with random modifiers and rewards announced before each wave. Every 5 waves, 1 additional reward type is added permanently. As such, you will get 1 random reward at wave 1 to 4, 5 to 9 will have 2 rewards, 10 to 14 will have 3 random rewards, 15 to 19 4 random rewards, and the final wave, wave 20, will feature 5 random reward types. Inside the Simulacrum, you will encounter the usual Delirium monsters, similar to the ones you encounter in your maps in a wave-style format. The respawn mechanic seems to rely on entire groups of enemies dying. If you leave a single enemy behind, it won't spawn a new wave because that group, quote unquote, is still alive. As a result, the best way to guarantee yourself a large amount of rewards is to focus on 2 or 3 spawn points and make absolutely sure you kill every single mob in those spawn points to rapidly respawn the enemies and get a guaranteed 5 or 6 level reward every round. Additionally, Wave 15 will always feature one of the Delirium bosses, either Kosis or Omniphobia. Killing them in this round will also guarantee you a unique item drop. This can be any Delirium specific unique, either one of the 4 armor pieces or any of the unique jewels, such as Megalomaniac, Split Personality, and of course, the voices. As such, you want to make absolutely sure that you manage to kill the bosses in this round, as this is the only round in which they can drop a unique. They can also despawn. If you are speed farming for voices, you could stop after wave 15 and open a new Simulacrum, as the last 5 waves do not drop it, guaranteed. Of course, that would be a large waste of your currency, but hey, now at least you know, right? Now, getting to my collected data. The methodology used here is quite simple. Buy a ton of Simulacrums and run them in groups of 3, then collect a snapshot of the gained items and compile them in a spreadsheet. Then you simply take all the information, calculate them together, and average them out. This is how I got to the conclusions I'll be presenting here. Of course, further limitations for the data, as I wanted to be conservative as possible with my estimates to give you an average minimum profit. No actual items are counted at all. Neither unique items, nor rares, nor anything else. I've only counted items such as currency, divination cards, scarabs, or fragments, which are easily liquefiable without much effort and that have a very particular price that doesn't fluctuate tremendously for every person that holds it. Nothing is counted below a minimum profit of 5 chaos, as those currency items would never be sold by any sane player. As a result, everything below a stack count of 10 and below a value of 5 chaos has been omitted in the final calculations for profit. There are many jackpot-style drops that I've gotten, and that others will get during their Simulacrum runs, such as the Voices Jewel, a great Split Personality, or a 6-link unique armor worth multiple exalts, but none of them are included in this datasheet at all. I've only counted Megalomaniacs and Split Personality at their base prices of 30 chaos and 15 chaos respectively, despite them always being worth a ton more than this. Lastly, to get a real profit, I also assumed a base cost of 95 chaos per Simulacrum. I've usually gotten them for around 80, but I wanted to make sure that this data is as conservative as possible, as mentioned before, and those are the current prices. Every Simulacrum run was done with the same build, and no changes to the build were made outside of the very last run to guarantee a steady loot level. Every Simulacrum run was 100% completed to wave 20 and beyond. The total data set only featured 9 deaths. This is important as the Simulacrum stops respawning monsters once you die, meaning the loot level will likely be reduced from the maximum possible you could have gained in that round. Every Simulacrum run was with a full set of incubators. I've only used incubators that dropped in the Simulacrum itself and refreshed them after each wave they ran out in. Now, I'll be linking to my spreadsheet in the description down below. Feel free to make copies of it, to add your own datasets, or do whatever you want with the data. The first 6 columns are pretty much the only important ones, as the rest is just raw data. Firstly, in the light gray colored area, you got my final conclusions, as well as my entire testing methodology explained again, in case you want to reproduce it. The green area around and to the right of it has the compiled data for every single item dropped. Important here, if you scroll down through the list, you'll see some red numbers in the total C column. That's column 6. These are items that have been omitted from the light gray total profit calculations, as the total profit was below 5C, as mentioned before. Now, to the actual information at hand. Any single Simulacrum will, at average, net you around 381.77 chaos in profits, including maps, fragments, essences, divination cards, fossils, oils, prophecies, and incubators, aka easy to sell items that you can also just sell in bulk. This already includes the entry price, of course. The actual amount gained would be more around 477 chaos if you don't count the entry cost at all. For the Simulacrums, I assumed a 95 chaos entry point, resulting in an initial investment of around 3,195 chaos for all 33 runs. The total net profit gained over the 33 tested Simulacrums is 12,598.49 chaos, or about 96 Exalted Orbs, assuming today's prices of about 131 per Exalt. A good build should be able to run a single Simulacrum once every 15 to 20 minutes, netting an average hourly profit of around 1,145 cows, or to around 1,527 cows, or about 9 to 13 Exalted Orbs total. Again, I want to stress that this does not include any kind of jackpot hit, with the general drops nor with the unique items. The only jackpots counted here are divination cards that were worth something. However, this should not influence the overall data much, as our dataset is large enough to balance out these very rare instances of getting like a 2 or 3 Exalted Orb div card. What this data actually means. Simulacrums are ridiculously valuable to run, and should not be sold by anybody that can handle at least 17 to 18 waves of it. You'll make currency hand over fist, not even counting all the potential jackpot drops in the rare items or uniques that will drop. They should not be anywhere close to the price point they have at the moment, but could easily sustain prices 2 to 3 times as expensive as they currently are. It also means that a huge amount of markets are in for a beating once more and more players start being able to run their endgame simulacrums, as it drops such a variety of loot. Most markets will likely be affected by the incredibly high amount of drops, which will make mapping a lot less expensive. For example, the Fragment and Scarab market is already at a point where not running a map with Scarabs is honestly just a dumb thing to do. You can easily buy dozens or hundreds of cheap Scarabs in bulk from all the Simulacrum runners and just throw them into every map you run, regardless of any other level of investment. My final recommendation: buy up as many as you can get, and run them as fast as humanly possible before every market gets severely saturated by the variety of drops granted by the Simulacrum. I'd imagine they'll still be worth picking up even at like 200 cows a pop or something like that, potentially even sustaining 300 cows, depending entirely on how saturated all the other markets get. Always remember, the popular voices jewel can only be dropped in a Simulacrum, so it always has that potential for the jackpot drop to occur on top of the normal profits gained. I hope this data presentation was clear and concise, as well as easy to understand and informative to you. You can check all the data yourself in the spreadsheet linked in the description down below if you got any questions or would like to see the exact breakdown for yourself. If there are any questions left afterwards, always feel free to leave a comment on this video, hit me up on Twitter, or join my Discord and ask me in there directly. If there is something you would like me to collect data on in a similar fashion for the next episode, please let me know as well. I do love my spreadsheets. Now, for the last little segment, I'll be covering the weekly Delve update, as well as a bunch of rapid-fire tips and tricks for this following week, as always. Most fossils have pretty much remained about the same price. They're still incredibly popular crafting options even after the nerfs. Especially small cluster jewels can be extremely potent when crafted properly with specific fossil combinations, which definitely helps to keep the prices where they should be. The best fossils to farm are still the corroded, perfect, serrated, lucid, and shattering fossils in that order, but there is also a new contestant in the enchanted fossil. It has seen a small surge of popularity this past week and has managed to claim the number 3 slot. As a result of this ranking, my recommendation would be the fungal caverns first and the magma fissure second. The magma fissure pretty much grants all the drops the frozen hollow does, except it trades shattering and serrated fossils for enchanted ones. With the recent rise of their prices, it is now worthwhile to focus on the magma fissure over the frozen hollow. This, however, does not make the frozen hollow bad at all. If you still prefer it, it's fine. The current prices for this week's top fossils are as follows. Corroded fossils are now going for 8C after a small 1C dip. Perfect fossils are sitting at around 7 chaos still. Serrated, shattering, and lucent fossils have found themselves at 5 chaos, and gilded fossils are at around 4 chaos each, same as last week. The rest of the fossils are somewhat below the 2 chaos mark, so they're only really worthwhile to farm and sell in very large bulks, but I don't know if I would even bother. Happy fossil hunting, and good luck in your delves. Now, getting into the rapid fire tips and tricks section for this video. Run the Simulacrum. No, seriously, do it. I've covered this one last week and now in depth in this one, but one last time, seriously, just run them. Stop selling them unless you're too weak to handle it. It's the new blighted maps, but like way better. You make a ton of currency off of these. Just make sure enough you're actually able to get to like, you know, wave 18 or so. Good luck on getting those voices, by the way. Man, they're hard. Again, use your essences. I've mentioned this one last week as well, but I've seen a ton of people straight up forget about this tip the second they heard it. Seriously, use your essences. They're free exals just lying in your essence tab. I know how pretty it can be to have it filled up essence tab, trust me, but if you're low on cash, a singular essence craft can easily get you started on amassing the next mirror. Throw a few Fizz 2 attack essences on Steel Rings, some Mana Ray S1s on Cerulean Rings, etc, etc. Another popular base to craft on are like Amethyst Rings. The more Chaos Res, the better. Just a little crafting tip right there as well. It's really easy to transform those hundreds of 2 to 3 Chaos Essences into dozens of 50 plus Chaos items. Don't forget about it this time, alright? Actually use them, lads. Fuzzlecraft Stitch and Vices. As per usual, this is my week 3 tip. Pristine plus Prismatic are probably the easiest to hit it big with, as you can simply craft anything missing and make a good belt. Dense plus Prismatic have a little bit of a higher ceiling, but they're also very difficult to hit properly, as you can't simply craft Energy Shield on a belt. Aberrant plus Prismatic are also stupidly worthwhile, as Chaos Res is at an all-time premium. Get yourself an eye level 86 plus Stitch and Vice base, simply socket the selected fossils into a resonator, and then definitely remember that catalysts exist and you should probably use them. Because you probably forgot about them, didn't you? Put 4 of the resistance catalysts onto the white Stygian. That way, you save a ton of money, and you have a way higher chance to hit a 100 Chaos plus belt, as most trade websites still count the quality as base resistances. Alternatively, you can also aim for hunter bases, and use the life/mana catalysts. I personally prefer the resistance-based crafts, however, they're just easier to get, honestly. And with those last few tips wrapped up, I'll be ending this chaos report. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you would have wanted me to talk about anything specific that I might not have covered. If you want to support the creation of these videos, feel free to check out my Patreon and maybe consider signing up for it. You can find a link to it in the description down below. Any and all support is highly appreciated. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thingamajig, like and dislike the video, and check me out over on twitch.tv/LoneWolf. I stream pretty much every day, and you can get some early insights to future episodes fairly easily, as I usually talk about my plans and thoughts about the Chaos Report all the time. You can find a link to the stream in the description down below. And with that, thanks for watching, and keep farming those exalts, and running those simulacrums, I guess.